let's start with your background. You're born and raised in Nigeria. How did your early life and education shape your leadership journey?
Thank you, John. I'm the first of six children from my parents. And from my part of the world, when you are the first child, that has some leadership responsibilities. And if you happen to be a male, then it is even more so. So one of six, my parents, my mother was a teacher, was a teacher, and my father was an accountant. Of course, for my primary school education, I was a prefect in the primary school. Those are prefects are officers they elected among students. Those are called prefects. And I was what they call an attendance prefect, and my duty was to make sure that I get to school early enough to get the registers ready for all the teachers to take the attendance of students who come in. So the implication of that is that I had to be in school early. I couldn't afford to come late. So that was another leadership responsibility. For the secondary school education, I was the senior prefect. So I was like the number one prefect for the secondary school. That wasn't just a decision of the school's management. There was some element of voting that goes into that. So you could see at every point in my journey, there has been something with some leadership responsibilities involved. Of course, like you'll get to know later, even in the university, it was my privilege to charter the Rotary Club, which was then another
Right.
another privilege to leadership. Yes. So along the line, you can see that
Right.
that has been there.
So based on that sort of early upbringing and values, you then went on to study and become an engineer. Tell us a bit about your professional career.
Yes, I studied engineering from the University of Technology, Bauchi, as it was called, and I worked for Shell Oil for actually almost all of my career. Because I joined Shell very, very early. So and of course, Shell Oil is a petroleum company, multinational, international oil company. So I joined as an engineer, but like with many of these establishments or corporations, your initial skills, at certain points, you need leadership and management. So at a point, I stopped doing engineering and went into planning and then into safety, which was my duty at a point to make sure that every single person that goes to work uh, in Shell, Nigeria, is able to go to work and come back home safe. A big responsibility, you will say here.
And so you obviously had a very successful professional life, but you also had, of course, a very successful Rotary a career and a Rotary journey. Tell us a bit about, how did you hear about Rotary? How did you get involved? You mentioned earlier you were a Rotary actor. Just give us a short summary of your Rotary journey.
Thank you. I actually got involved with Rotary at the age of 18. That was when I chartered the Rotary Club in the university. But how did Rotary find me, or how did I find Rotary? I was simply watching TV. When you leave secondary school in my country, then in your final year of secondary school, you have this a little bit longer period of vacation before you can get into the colleges or universities. So there I was at home, nobody else with me at home, so there was nobody controlling whether I can turn on the TV or not, which there will have been a restriction in those days. So I was just watching TV, and then I saw this gentleman who was talking about something, but I was attracted by the way he was saying what he was saying. So I wanted to hear him, and he was talking about Rotary, and I knew nothing about Rotary, and I took no cognizance of that after that until I got back to the university, and a Rotarian from the Rotary Club of Bauchi, who happened to be the public relations director for the university, approached me. I still don't know why he did, but he approached me and asked me, will you help us start the Rotary Club? We are trying to start one here. And I asked him, Rotary. So it sounded like Rotary. And I said, does it have anything to do with one gentleman that normally wears white, speaks nice English? So, oh yes. And that happened to have been the past district governor, a district governor of Rotary, then District 911, I think, in Lagos at that time. So yes, that was how Rotary basically found me. So I was a member of the Rotary Club in the university. When I left the university and graduated and went to work in Port Harcourt, I joined the community-based Rotary Club. It was institution-based, just universities only. Then I joined the community-based Rotary Club when I started working. And when I thought I was ready for Rotary, I moved into Rotary.
Started with watching somebody, a Rotarian, speak on TV. And Rotaract, Rotary, you then went through the district governor, club president, the whole chain, and now you're going to be the second person from Africa who lead Rotary as president. Jonathan Majabi, of course, also from Nigeria, was the first. What would you like to tell Rotarians about Rotary in Africa, and what might they be surprised to hear about Rotary in Africa?
Well, I suspect if I say Rotary is growing in Africa, that would not be a surprise. They probably get that as news all the time. But one of the other things I think many people don't know is that Rotary in Africa supports our Rotary Foundation at a very good level. And the message I like to pass, which I pass often to my African Rotarians, is that yes, there is a lot of work in our areas of focus we needed to do in Africa, and we do need our friends around the world to help us do that. But we must put in our bit. In essence, while Africa may be considered poor, African Rotarians are not any poorer than Rotarians anywhere else. So if people are giving, the African Rotarians need to bring their own share and put it on the table. And I'm glad they are responding to that. Many Rotarians may not realize that when you look at the top 30 countries contributing to the Rotary Foundation, there are 2 African countries in that list. And they are not at the bottom of the top 30. They are usually at the middle. At some point, one of them was in the top 10. And I'm hoping that now that they also can see a president they can touch, I normally use that to joke, maybe a third country from Africa will go into that list also.
Yeah. Well, of course, the African Rotarians, as you said, played a very significant role in many countries, and particularly in the eradication of polio in the African continent. And Nigeria was the last country where we were able to cross the finish line and stop the transmission of the wild polio virus. Obviously, in the northeast sections in Borno province and others, there was Borno state that it's a lot of issues. Talk a bit about your role in polio eradication and the role that African Rotarians played in getting Africa to be polio free.
For many of us from the African continent, from Nigeria in particular, which was the last country, polio wasn't something people tell us stories about. It's something you could see. It's something you could see. And I've been involved with the polio eradication effort for as long as I could remember my involvement with Rotary. Because we have polio right with us, we do a little bit more. We also participate. So we advocate to our various governments, and I do that a lot in Nigeria with our Nigerian Rotarians. We do a lot of awareness creation. You will have seen a lot of that. If you check the social media, you'll probably be seeing what Rotarians are doing to create awareness. Of course, we also donate to polio. Almost all our districts are, I persuade all our districts to make sure they do their 20% DDF to polio. Of course, organizationally, have been an advisor to the Nigerian National Polio Plus Committee, for a while. Have been a member also since I left as district governor. And if you ask me, I think leadership visibility is important. And I recall that there was a time there were parts of Nigeria where we had polio because, you find polio where you don't have access, where you have insurgency, security issues, and things like that. And we said every single past district governor should adopt one of these areas. And people were adopting, and nobody agreed to adopt the areas where we had the terrorism. As fate will have it, I schooled. My university education was in that part of the country, so I volunteered to go there. People thought I was stupid, but I went. One of the things Rotarians do when they go to the field is help do what we call to resolve non-compliances or to resolve rejection. So so the vaccinators or the immunizers go around doing their work. They will get to some houses, and the parents will say no, you can't do this. So they come and tell us when we are in the field to say we've encountered rejection there, and because the community trusts us, they trust Rotary. We go there and we have a conversation with the household, and a lot of times, 9 out of 10 cases, those things are resolved. If they are not resolved, we escalate, and the community leadership, this religious leadership, will take care of that. So when we are in the field, we make the work of the immunizers easier than when we are not in the field. And that is a direct role Rotarians play.
Yeah, and that's one of our great strengths as an organization, right? We're everywhere. We have deep community roots, and our Rotarians are respected in the communities, and as you described in the polio effort in Nigeria. And I think, the times I've traveled to Africa, I've been extremely impressed with the passion that the African Rotarians have shown toward polio eradication as an example for all the rest of us. I think as Rotarians, we need to realize we're not done until we're done. And we need to build on the example that you have set in Africa and continue to both fundraise, advocate, and immunize, and make sure that the world eventually is, rid of this terrible, terrible disease.
And John, it is important that we remind Rotarians, and this is for me, for the Africans in particular, and for those who have not seen polio for a while, our commitment is to eradicate polio. Our promise was to the children of the world. It wasn't to the children of North America or children of Africa. We said to the children of the world. That was our promise. So if we still have polio in Pakistan, we have it in Afghanistan. If we have polio anywhere, we have not delivered on that promise. And that's a promise we must deliver on.
Well, and of course, another key initiative that Rotary has. So obviously, polio is our number one corporate initiative, but membership growth is a very important part of Rotary's action plan and our going forward. And as we know, in certain parts of the world, Rotary is growing. Africa being one of them, Southeast Asia, and we have parts of the world: the United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, UK, Argentina, where we're seeing some fairly significant membership declines. Your area, as I said, is growing. What's the secret sauce? What lesson can be learned from membership growth in Africa? And what is your sort of overall vision of how we as an organization can continue to grow our organization everywhere, including in those countries I mentioned where we may be, seeing membership declines?
John, and this may sound very, very simplistic. I have a feeling in my interactions in some parts of the world where Rotary is not growing, that the sense of urgency is not there yet. Sense of urgency is not there yet. I think leadership may not have succeeded in building a case for change. I was at a zone institute, I think it was held in Poland, and these conversations came up. And it's like, look, the population in Poland is going down, this, so you can't expect growth. I know the factories that were there are shutting down. That is true. But the point is that there are new businesses that are happening. There are younger people that they are not in the traditional businesses, John. The old tools we have look for businesses. But there are many businesses today that don't have signages. That happens from people's bedrooms. Young people just share an office and you have 3-4 businesses. How do we find those people? We are looking for, it's true, we are still looking for business, professional, and community leaders, but where do we find them? How do we find those generation of people who are not in the traditional vocations or classifications that we used to know and that we are used to? So first for me is, in terms of vision, in terms of what should we do to solve this, is that we need to create a case for change that everybody can relate with, a sense of urgency where this is happening. See, if it's just numbers mean nothing. But you see, imagine you're a Rotarian, you've been a Rotarian for 40 years, and your Rotary disappears. What do you have to lose? And I think that brings the issue of, what are you grateful for example, by virtue of your Rotary membership? What will you lose if your Rotary club dies? I think many people don't think about it, and they wait, they watch. They know what we call the boiled frog phenomenon. Things get by, but suddenly it is too late to do something, which is very, very sad. We must make ourselves more welcoming to the young generation. So first, we need to be able to find them, those that are in the businesses, new tools to identify. And those tools are there in terms of technology on how to find them. We need to leverage that to find them. When we find them, we need to understand what is important to them. John, I talk about visible leadership commitment all the time. How do we tell these people, we welcome you?
Well, I think, you touched on this issue of change. We need to be ready to change. We have to recognize that the world today is not 1905 when Paul Harris set up the first club in Chicago, and you're absolutely right. But I guess the challenge then is when you're dealing with the demographic or the type of people we'd like to attract to our organization, what's the value proposition? In other words, what's and I suspect there's different value propositions for different people, and I do think we're very diverse and do offer, particularly if we start expanding our membership through the creation of new and innovative clubs, we can offer different value propositions to different people. But how would you say what's the core Rotary value proposition if you were trying to sell me on joining the organization? And then what's the elevator speech? You've got 30 seconds in an elevator to tell somebody about Rotary. What's your value proposition and what's your elevator speech?
And John, you see the word elevator speech, I've heard of that many, many times. And it will be part of my messaging to the Rotary world as I take on my presidency. There is no Rotarian I have met anywhere, and I mean anywhere, any part of our world, who has not said to me that Rotary changed them in a way. Anybody who has been Rotary 5-10 years, they will tell you together we see a world where people unite to create lasting change. Across the globe, Rotarians know what that means. In our communities, lasting change, Rotarians know what that means. But when you ask them, in ourselves, the room normally goes quiet. And I think that is where the so-called elevator speech needs to be rejigged. How has Rotary helped you make a lasting change in yourself? And we all have our stories, no matter the age, no matter the part of the world you come from. And our stories are different. And what I tell people is, this thing they call elevator speech, that moment when somebody is asking you about Rotary, this thing you commit your life to, you spend so much time on, what is it? So don't tell them about all these other things you hear. Tell them about your own story. How has Rotary changed you? And there are stories from everybody. And because it is your own story, it is authentic. And we need to do that more. And I will be encouraging Rotarians as we go on. Think about it. Create a journal, some kind of gratitude journal. What is it you are grateful for being a member of this organization? And feel free to share that. I am conscious of the fact that many of these stories are personal, and so people sometimes feel vulnerable sharing them. But that is what we need to do at this moment. That exactly is the value proposition. The reason you are there, maybe the reason somebody else will come. And because your story is local, it is local, and the person talking to you most likely is local to you, the person can relate with it. I've had the privilege of being many parts of the world and meeting Rotarians at different points in their various communities. Rotarians are happy people. Take that from me. I don't know how it happens. It just looks like you go into a community and you tell yourself, please give me all the happy people you have in this space. And they put them in one room and they call them Rotarians. Rotarians are happy people. And you see that behavior every single where you go, whether it is local, like you said, at a club level, at a district event that one has been privileged to go to. You see it at institutes, which is a wider group of people. You see it at the International Assembly. Have you seen those our cultural events? They're all very happy people. There is something that gives us happiness in Rotary, and we need to talk about it.
In other words, how many Rotarians say, yes, I give a lot, but I get a lot, but a lot of what getting is the making a difference in someone's lives. And so, and a big part of that is impact and impact in our organization. And so let's talk a bit about, we obviously do great works at the regional, local, international level within Rotary. We have, since 2013, really shifted the focus to sustainability, to greater impact. Talk a bit bit about your view on that, and what would be your recommendation to Rotarians as we do projects, as we try to make a difference in the world, and talk about this, the importance of sustainability and impact in the work that we do.
I think that is very important, and I think I'm not sure how that message has penetrated. You know, like in my club, for example, we'll do what a project during I think the on maternal and child health area of focus, for example. I will go to a health center, I will do a few things, I will leave. And I challenge my own club. I say, guys, what if we go to this health center and we take a benchmark to say, look, how many women come here to deliver babies? How many of them deliver safely? And we say, this is what we want to impact. So that when we say we are giving prenatal kits to women, we can tie that to the number of women who actually carry their pregnancy to term and deliver safely. And we can even follow a group to say, don't just give us at random. We see these women, we want to support these women from this beginning of their pregnancy to term. And we can say, because Rotary intervened, these people, 100% of them, 90% of them, whatever that comes out to be, this was the outcome. This is the impact on our community. That is very, very important. I told a story of impact with respect to polio. My club used to visit a home, every Christmas, just to support them for Christmas, make them happy. There were a lot of crippled children which were from polio. But you see, as Nigeria started becoming polio free, the number of children in that home started reducing. It got to a point there were none. But people didn't immediately relate it to the fact that that was the impact of our polio eradication work. In fact, the home, which was run by some Christian missionaries, had to be repurposed for other children. That is impact.
Right.
Well,
of course, a big part of impact is partnering. You talk about polio. We couldn't have gotten to where we are without the great partnership we have with WHO, CDC, UNICEF, Gavi, the Gates Foundation, the GPI. It's all about 1 + 1 is 3. So talk a bit about your experience and your thoughts about the importance of Rotarians, Rotary clubs, all of us in our work to be partnering with other organizations to even further increase our impact.
Yes, and that is, partnerships are very, very critical. Very, very critical. And a lot of it happened even locally. My club, my home club, just 4 days ago, finished a free eye care project in a community. We don't have 15 ophthalmologists. We don't even have any optometrist in my Rotary Club's membership. But we have a partnership with the Optometric Society of Nigeria. And they agreed that every year they will do this with us. They bring their equipment, they bring their people. We provide the medications, we do the advocacy, awareness creation, select the community, and make the people available. And that is how it works. We couldn't have done that on our own. And I suspect even the Optometric Society on their own may not have been able to do the kind of things we did, bringing the people out. Because people may not trust them, but they trust us. So partnerships are important. There are things we know we have as our strengths as Rotarians. We are international, but we are very, very local. So that is our strength. But those areas where we don't have the strength, we must leverage other people, other organizations to make that happen. And it is happening a lot of times. I'm not sure Rotarians are particularly conscious that this is what it should be. We need to encourage more of that, actually. One other thing about partnership is the internal one. You may not call that partnership, John, is to say, look, you have 2 clubs in Evanston. Each of them are doing something small, something small. Perhaps if you partner as Rotary clubs also, you can do something bigger. And then you can even get external partnership better because they are dealing with a single group of people, not talking to 3 people at the same time.
And I also think, when you were talking earlier about the leadership skills that you pick up. And I think we don't talk about that enough in Rotary because, many people say, I like the networking aspect of it. I love giving back to my community. Rotary opens me up to a broad international community so I can make a regional impact and a global impact and all the youth exchange that we do and bringing people together. But I think something we don't talk about enough is is the leadership skills, the one develops by joining a Rotary Club. And so tell us a bit about how that affected you, how you became a better leader, and what was it in Rotary that allowed you to eventually become the president of Rotary International?
Okay, I worked for a multinational, like I said, Shell Oil. So dealing with diverse groups has been part of my career, so to speak. But you see, I think somewhere in my statements I said it that Rotary made me a diplomat. Rotary made me a diplomat, which is part of those skills. What has an engineer got to do with being a diplomat, for example? Rotary made me a diplomat. How? So you were a district governor, okay, so that may still be local. And then you become director. And a director of the kind of zones, spear zones I had to deal with. So 48 Rotary countries in Africa. Just think of that diversity. Then you have another 30 something stretching from Israel, Austria up till Ukraine. That is what you are dealing with. It's one of the biggest diversities. 78 or 83 of Rotary's 200 countries. And then you have to navigate through that. You have to navigate through what I call the national interests, of those countries, and balance that with what we call the Rotary interest. And sometimes having to physically intervene and making sure that Rotarians still remember that they are Rotarians, despite their differences in terms of the national policies of their various countries. That takes a lot of skill. And I will have taken it for granted until I faced it. And I think it's one of those things that if I wasn't a Rotarian, if I didn't have the opportunity of serving at that level internationally, I would have no idea what it means. My view of the world is completely different.
And I think that, if you talk to many Rotarians, they'll say, Rotary opened the opportunity. I never would have imagined doing, let's say I'm living in a small town somewhere, let's say in Mexico, and now I'm doing a water project in Nigeria. And then, of course, all the fellowships that we have of Rotarians that get together around, different common interests, or the Rotary action groups. It's all about bringing people together. And so many Rotarians I talk to echo what you just said: being a Rotarian, stepping into leadership position, and getting involved in the various Rotary structures has really opened the world up to me. Well, we're getting toward the end of our podcast here, but let me just end by two questions. If you could provide two quick answers. Big part of impact also is fundraising. We need the money. It's partnership, it's enthusiasm, it's engagement, but it's also money. Our Rotary Foundation last year broke all records and raised over $500 million. With that money, we're able to have tremendous impact in the world. You've walked the walk. You're an Arch Clump Society member, meaning that you've part of a select group who has been very generous, contributed more than $250,000 to the Rotary Foundation. Talk a bit about the importance of giving to our foundation, question one. And two, let's close on, I remember you and I, very early on after you had been chosen as president-elect, we're meeting, and I asked you, Yinka, after you finish your presidency, what's the one thing you'd like to be remembered for? What's the one legacy item you'd like to leave? So let's talk about the importance of the foundation, and then perhaps we can close on, at the end of your presidential year, what would you like to be remembered for?
Yes, and thank you. So for the foundation, for example, if you believe in something, you want to invest in it. I think that is critical. So Rotary has changed me in many ways. So I'm happy to trust Rotary with my funds to do good in the world. The funding opportunities or the gift opportunities you have in the Rotary Foundation allows you flexibility to do many things. I support the endowment mostly. And you know why? The endowment allows you to continue to do good even when you are gone. Isn't that interesting? Lastly on that is, you see, for those of us from maybe you can say the developing world, you put $1 into something and you get like $5 back. That's a good business, if you know what I mean. So where else should you put your money? You want to put it where it is well used, where it is well kept, and where it is delivering you a lot of returns. The Rotary Foundation is doing that. And I think the Charity Navigator is showing that as an external independent organization. Almost 14, 15 years now, we've had the top rating from Charity Navigator. That is good news. That is good news. Legacy. I will wish by the time I'm done that Rotary actually grew. That Rotary grew. That this thing we call our number one internal priority, that we have stopped just talking about it, that Rotarians everywhere, that I have succeeded in persuading Rotarians everywhere to do something about it. And that because they listened to me and they did something about it in their various parts of the world, Rotary is growing. And that growth will reflect in the numbers, it will reflect in our giving to the foundation, it will reflect in the impact we make in our various communities. Where our communities are currently not feeling us well, they will feel us better. That is the kind of thing I would like to see.
Well, thank you so much, Yinka. It's great to have chatted. Best of luck. And again, thank you to our audience for listening to our podcast. And stay tuned for future ones. But in the meantime, again, it's great to have a conversation with Yinka Babalola, the Rotary National President for 2026-2027 from Nigeria. Thank you again, Yinka.
Thank you, John. It's my pleasure.